This is my main setup. Everything YouTube related has either been filmed here or worked on because my main editing system is that Mac Mini, and as you can see, it's definitely seen better days. Well, what exactly do I mean by that? Take a look at this. This is my Y2K setup with my PowerMac G5, my acrylic cinema display, and even with this still being a work in progress, it is looking way better than my other setup, which is supposed to be my main setup. This is just more efficient to use because as an ADC display, all I have to do is press the power button there and everything is good to go. Now, obviously, ADC is a standard back when the G5 and before were actually current computers, so I can't really use that in my main setup, but even if you take that out of the equation, this is still a more efficient layout because there's no clutter on the desk. This doesn't count because it is of course temporary, and everything else here is also clean. The monitor, the power Mac, and the desk itself are all dust free. Going back to this here though, yeah, even though this in theory should be the better setup because we have two monitors, we have a larger desk, and we have a newer Mac, I'd rather use the other setup as it is because, well, yeah. This is the Mickey desk from the meatball store that also has furniture. Now, I've had this desk for a very long time. It has served me very well, and I hope to continue using it because it really is an awesome desk, but I'm just not utilizing everything to its full potential. Before we completely overhaul the desk setup itself, I do want to say that I have already cleaned up the front of the desk. The drawers, I've taken them out completely, taken everything out of them, and I've never actually properly utilized these drawers because honestly it just had a whole bunch of random stuff, but now I actually want to change that and actually use these drawers. The shelves in here have also never been utilized properly. Now it's kind of usable as it is right now, but it's mainly just a whole bunch of cables, my backup hard drive, and there were a couple other miscellaneous things, but for the most part, it was pretty much just dust. But by far the worst part about the desk itself was that back section there, at least in terms of dust. Now, I've never used this area before, but it's supposed to be for a power strip and just an area where you can actually manage cables. Now, I currently manage cables inside one of these shelves, and while I still will do that, you can tell that it's never been used because there was so much dust there, I actually couldn't even believe how bad it was. But this is exactly why I wanted to start cleaning up before we filmed the video, because there would be a lot of extra nonsense going on here because, well, it's just a whole bunch of dust built up from years of usage, or I guess lack of, and well, at least now we're starting off with a mostly clean slate. Not to mention the floor itself because, well, I mean, it's just a floor, it gathers dust and other debris. It's not exactly super exciting to see that being cleaned up as well, but at least we're starting off fresh. Alongside this small section here, I did go ahead and clean up everything else surrounding the desk, at least as much as I can right now. And even though it doesn't look all that great, well, it is at least clean. Something that I'm really excited about with the desk overhaul is actually making use of the drawers here. Like I said before, there was previously just a whole bunch of random nonsense here, and they already had a spot elsewhere. So there were some old cables that I put away with other cables. There were some old chargers, like that one, that were put away with other chargers. That one still needs to be moved over. And there were also some office supplies that were put away with other office supplies. Now, if I find myself needing something again, I can always put it back in. But that is exactly what I want. I want stuff that I actually use on a regular basis instead of it just being a storage area that'll never be touched for basically years. And alongside the initial cleaning, I did also take out the drawers themselves and I gave them a good clean. As you can see, it is looking fantastic. And I did also clean up the inside part, which is usually just covered by the drawer itself. So everything is looking as new as it can possibly be. And we basically have a brand new desk again. And what better way to start off the actual organization here than with my iFixit toolkit. So this is exactly how I want to use the drawer here. It's actually being used to store something This is also a great spot to have something extra alongside the toolkit here. Maybe with the unboxing knife, it's actually usable now. And of course we have the awesome shelving here, which just like the drawers, I've never used to its full potential. First off, I actually had to tighten down the door because it was actually getting caught on the bottom here. But with that out of the way, the door actually works like a door. Secondly, we have the top shelf, which powers everything in the setup here. And yes, it's messy, but it still does technically work. Like I said though, I do want to try and optimize this shelf as well, and hopefully make this look a little bit nicer. And finally, the last thing we have here is the Seagate hard drive, which I use as my backup drive for everything YouTube. Apart from that though, it's just an ugly cable mess if you actually look at it. This section here though was just as bad as that shelf because, like I said, I've never actually utilized this to its full potential, and well, the dust definitely shows that. Previously though, the power strip was actually on the floor here, and well, even though this was a long time ago, as you can imagine, it was very messy and very dusty. Ever since I installed this in here though, it has been significantly better, and not to mention less dusty. But I'm pretty sure the last time I made any modifications to the power solution here was back when I installed the cinema display. If not, maybe a little bit after that, but it's already been years since I've had this display, and it's pretty much been untouched since then. Now this is a slightly newer addition to the setup where it gives me 3 additional outlets as well as 3 USB ports for charging. The only real device that's actually being powered up by this power strip is the AirPort. But apart from that, everything else here is just a whole bunch of iPhone chargers, and even though it looks messy on the inside, it does actually look pretty cool on the outside. It makes it so I have easy access to 30-pin and an additional lightning connector. Even though I don't really charge too many devices at this setup here, it is still a cool addition to have. The only real downside about it is that every time you open up the door, you have to deal with this. But the cool part about it is that this is made out of Lego and no modification is necessary. With all of this out of the way, we can finally begin with this. This general area typically stays dust-free, but when it comes to the rest of the desk and the monitor side of things, yeah, it's really dusty, it's really bad, not to mention lack of cable organization here makes it even worse. So this really needs to be fixed up, and we got a lot of work ahead of us, but I can't wait to see the end result. So this is the easiest part right now. Now this iPhone 6 I actually do use sometimes. I gotta charge this up, but that is easy to take care of. These other iPhones I have used previously, but I haven't used them in a while. I mean, can you tell by the dust? This is actually an iPod Touch 4th generation, but these have a better spot, so I will move these off to the side. And then we have some coasters, which are always nice and handy. These can actually go in the larger drawer. And for now, I know it's not a great solution, but for now I will actually put all these SD cards and flash drives in the large drawer because I just want to double check and see what I actually have on them. And then we have the charger cube, which just needs to go with the other chargers. All we have left here are 2 mice that I actually never use anymore because of this. Now the story behind these is that this actually goes to the keyboard because it's a wireless mouse and keyboard combo, and this is actually a Microsoft mouse that I actually cleaned up and restored quite a while ago now, but it is still a great mouse to have, and I have had it in the setup. I did actually use it for a while, but ever since I got this, I just never removed it, and it's always been basically like that. So yeah, we're gonna have to get rid of this, but this will get moved over to another setup at some point. But because we are getting rid of the 2 mice here, I might as well talk about this. These are the accessories that I use alongside the Mac. Now I know that the keyboard itself is nothing too fancy, but the trackpad itself is actually really nice, especially when it comes to Final Cut Pro. So there's a lot I can talk about the keyboard and the trackpad here, but I'll try and keep it brief. This keyboard goes with this mouse, if you haven't already guessed already by the color scheme, and it is handy to have because it uses just a single USB adapter. Now ideally in the future I would like to take this setup and use it as a test setup here because obviously All I have to do is plug it into the system and I have a wireless mouse and keyboard good to go. The reason why I'm using this here though is because I don't necessarily care much about this keyboard in terms of cosmetics. So if the keys get worn down from editing over time, then it's not that big of a concern. I have used an Apple keyboard in the past with this setup here, but I stopped using it mainly just because I don't want to wear down the keys just from Final Cut Pro. I would rather get a used Apple keyboard that already has a bunch of usage, so that way I don't really care about the cosmetics as much. The Magic Trackpad, on the other hand, is something that I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I do. It is so easy to move across the timeline, and it's a nice tool to have, especially for pro-grade applications. And it's not even just Final Cut Pro. If you're using another editing software, this is a fantastic piece of mouse pointer technology to have. This is, of course, the second edition with the Lightning connector, which is still awesome to have on this setup here. And even though it doesn't take actual batteries, it is nice to also plug this in and use it as a wired one. Now, I don't necessarily do that as much because I do like to have this stuff wireless, because in the event I need to use this space, I can easily just take the trackpad, the keyboard, take them all out of the way, and this area is good to go. And yes, this is of course the space gray version, which doesn't necessarily match the monitor, but it is very cool to have. And of course, there is the Apple logo on the back side here with 4 rubber feet to help it obviously not move around. Now, I do use it on this mouse pad here mainly just for comfort, but it is still nice to have on the desk itself as well. So with the keyboard, mouse, and trackpad out of the way, we still have that other mouse to deal with. The entire time that this mouse has been here, it has been using up one of the USB ports on the cinema display here. So I can finally have that extra USB port back because, well, it's not being used up by this mouse. So finally, we will actually have a clean desk once again. Well, that was the easy part. Now we actually have to deal with the big items here. Now, before we actually get rid of everything here, I will talk about this PC tower. Now, the reason why this is here is because, well, I've had this for ages. I've had it before I had the Mac Mini. The Mac Mini basically replaced this tower as a whole, and even some other systems as well. Before the Mac Mini, this was a system that I used more often, hence why it's in the setup here. But it's a Windows 7 based system. I can't remember the exact specifications. It's not bad, but yeah, it's not exactly a modern system anymore. And even though I do love using old systems, well, I haven't used this in this setup for ages at this point. So it's basically only stayed in the setup in case I ever want to use like Windows 7 or whatever. But I've only been using that Mac Mini in the setup here. And I have other Windows machines if I want to use 7 or even like, older or newer versions of Windows. That's dust, if you couldn't tell. Yeah, it hasn't been used in a long while, and at this point it's basically just a stand for the Mac Mini itself. With the setup unplugged, let's go ahead and begin. Obviously, the iPads are not a core component of the setup here, but if anything, it's more of an example of how I'm actually using this as a shelf. You probably saw this earlier and are wondering, why is this on top of the Mac Mini? Is it overheating? Well, I hope not. I just happen to have this cooler here and, well, I didn't know where to put it, so one day I just put it on top of the Mac Mini and, well, it's stayed ever since. Now, in terms of, does this actually help out with the temperatures on the Mac Mini? I don't really know, but it does get warm after extensively using the Mac Mini, so I guess it's doing something. Now, am I going to keep this back on the Mac Mini? Well, considering where I want to put it, I don't think we'll have room for it, so I'll probably just put this off to the side. It really doesn't serve any purpose, but it is funny to look at. Yeah, this is pretty bad. Let's go ahead and unplug everything here, and I might as well also open it up just to see if it's dusty or not. I haven't really cleaned it ever since I installed the RAM and the SSD, and that was forever ago, so there's bound to be some dust inside, considering the top is also pretty dusty. So I'm pretty much using most of the ports on the Mac Mini here. I'm not taking advantage of FireWire, which is unfortunate, but that's only because I don't have an adapter for 800 to 400. Yeah, cables are going to be falling all over the place here. So apart from FireWire, I do have basically everything else hooked up to the setup. And the really nice part about the 2012 Mini is the fact that we do actually have USB 3. I don't have many FireWire devices, and the ones I am using are hooked up to my RetroMac setup. So it looks like I don't really have to do much of a actual clean out here. And yeah, back when the Mac Mini itself was actually upgradable. The headphones will go off to the side for now, and I will put the AirPort on the desk itself so it doesn't actually fall over once this gets out of the way. The AirPort itself has been vertical for so long that I almost forgot it actually has a reflective Apple logo. Now that is of course to indicate that this is a time capsule and not just a normal AirPort Extreme. The reason why there's another Ethernet cable as well is because at one point there was another desktop here. The slim Dell tower with Windows 7 that has been featured on the channel before used to also be in this setup here. But ever since I removed that Dell from the setup, I never removed the cable because of how it's actually organized. This is the first time this tower has been moved in years. So it's nice to finally get that out of the way. And yeah, that is looking terrible. So far, I've cleaned up the floor itself. I've cleaned up this side of the desk. This actually had more dust than the floor, which was pretty funny, but it also wasn't as bad as this. So yeah, this is still just the beginning. We got a lot of work ahead of us, but first I'm going to remove all of these cables, and the stuff that I know that we won't be reusing, I'll immediately put away into their proper spot with other cables, because we got a lot of cables here that will not be reused. So the AirPort and the Ethernet cables are out of the way, and most of the immediate cable mess is gone. Now these are actually just two pieces of cork that I used to minimize vibration for the AirPorts, because it does of course have a hard drive, and every time it makes a backup it can get noisy sometimes. But I did go ahead and take out the cable for the cinema display. We still need to actually deal with the power supply, but it's relatively easy compared to the Dell monitor. Now all of that cable nonsense is for the Dell monitor, but we will be talking about this monitor in depth later on, because there are some changes coming to the setup regarding the second display. As for cables on the floor though, the only thing left is the power cable for the PC that we just took out. Once that's out of the way, we have another cable out of the setup. That USB cable is also, again, for the Dell monitor, so even though it looks like it's not organized, it's all connected to that. So the power supply is one thing, but how bad is it underneath? Yeah, that's terrible. This hasn't been wiped down in forever. But it's good that we're actually finally getting around to this, because, well, yeah, it was definitely due for a change. Now that is what it's supposed to look like. As you can see, all of this cable mess is indeed connected to the Dell monitor. I'm not even going to bother with this right now because, well, for one, it's all dusty. And secondly, some of these cables are not going to be reused because the DVI cable anyways was connected to the PC that used to be here. So yeah, there is a lot we can do with this, but for now, I'm just going to completely remove it from the desk, and we'll take a look at it later on. It was so dusty that there's actually an outline of where the monitor used to be. Now, it's not perfect, but it sure is looking a lot better. Now, we're obviously going to have to clean it even more than this, but I did not realize just how dusty it was. Well, what do you know? There's another dust outline. Now, I just want to say that I know that this setup is very dusty and dirty, but this is more of the exception rather than the norm. If you've seen previous videos in the past, then you know that I like to clean things up as much as possible. I like to bring stuff back to its factory condition, such as the Power Mac G5, the acrylic cinema display, and even with the entire iTunes setup and the Y2K setup, I try to keep that as clean as possible. Not to mention all the keyboards, mice, and even Sony camera straps that I've cleaned up in the past. So yeah, I would not typically leave it like this, but considering I'm more focused on actually using the Mac here, it just kind of got away from me because, not to mention, the setup itself was also not as optimized as I wanted it to be. And I'm glad to actually bring you guys along for the journey because, well, it's going to be very exciting to actually have a proper setup once again. So this is the current state of the desk itself. As you can see, everything has been removed except for the microphone stand, and I will remove it off camera. It's not that difficult to actually remove from the desk. Well, there it is. The dust outline is indeed there, and honestly, I'm not even surprised. The top of the desk is completely cleaned up, and honestly, I cannot remember the last time it was actually like this. There has always been a monitor, or at least something on top of it, so it's actually kind of surreal to see it like this once again. And you probably already saw that the drawers are out of the way again because we will need all the space we can get when it comes to cable organization. I have no idea what's actually hiding behind here. It's probably going to be a lot of dust. Well, this is actually very surprising. It's not that dusty back here, and honestly, there is some dust, but I'm pretty sure the worst part of the desk was actually on top here, behind all the monitors. So this is very cool to see, and it means that we don't have that much to clean up. The desk itself is now completely empty, so all the cables are gone, all the dust is gone, and now we can actually start putting stuff back in one by one. The first and the most important thing that I want to talk about is the power solution for the desk here. Now, this was my main power strip. It is a SurgeMaster 2 trademark with phone line protection, and it's made by Belkin. Now, it has this awesome late 90s design, but this one was actually made in 2000 based on the date code, and it is a really cool thing to have, but it's actually kind of unfortunate how it was set up because even though it's a reliable power strip, it was inside the desk this entire time, and it means that you can't actually look at it while it's actually in service. It has a variety of features, such as 2 outlets that are spaced apart for larger plugs, a set of phone jacks here with another on the side, and not to mention the classic neon lights that it has, and the power light actually flickers because it's an older neon tube, but when it's actually in direct light, it actually stays on because that's just how neon lights are. Now, it's a very cool power strip, but we will be replacing it. I will not be getting rid of it though because this is a perfect power strip to use with something like the iTunes setup where we have retro equipment in action, and it's also nice to have a retro power strip as well. Even though it has served me well as my main power strip at the desk here, it will live on with other era-appropriate equipment. We will be swapping out the Belkin for this. This is a new power strip, and I'm actually really excited to set this up. Now, initially, it does look like we are downgrading from the old one because this has 8 outlets and this only has 6, but the advantage here is that the 6 outlets that are available here are all spaced out from one another, and we also get 3 USB-A ports for charging. Now, we do miss out from the phone line protection and the awesome name, but like I said, this will be awesome for the retro area, and this one just makes more sense for this setup. Not to mention that this is actually smaller than the old one, which makes it possible to actually use it in the cable organization area. It does also have a power switch, but it is on the side instead of on the top. Now, alongside the new power strip, I do still have the other 2. They are just as new as this one, but in terms of cable management, I don't exactly know where I'm going to place them yet. Ideally, I would like to have the cube on the desk itself where it used to be, but as for the other one, I don't know if I'm going to put it back on the shelf or maybe in the cable organization area. It's all going to depend on the overall cable management because, well, this is changing, everything is changing. I'm just going to have to figure it out along the way. But as for power, we are most definitely covered with as many outlets as we could need. This is honestly insane. I can't believe how well it actually fits in this area here, and there's even enough space to actually reach behind it and access the power switch. So no worries in terms of actually being able to access that. Of course, the drawer will be in the way, but it's not like I'm going to be accessing the Switch all that much anyways. But it is still really cool to have that as an option. I've never used this organization area, but now we can actually use it in probably the best way possible, because alongside this, I can also install the power supply for the cinema display right there, and everything is conveniently placed here without having to take up extra space on the desk itself. It's almost as if this area was designed for this. I have also tested it out with the drawer here, and for normal cables, it will work just fine. So obviously just a normal plug like this. This is the cable for the Mac Mini. The drawer will close just fine. There's enough clearance. But the only wall adapter that I have is for the hard drive itself. And even though it does actually fit, it ever so slightly actually touches the drawer itself, and I want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So I think that the best course of action for this would be to actually keep this separate and reuse this power strip for network type of gear stuff, so stuff like the hard drive and anything else I might actually use inside the desk itself. So this will be nice to keep here with its dedicated equipment, but everything else can actually be plugged in here without having to take up extra space in the desk. As much as I want to begin with cable organization, we can't really do that right now because we actually have to figure out where everything is going. So yeah, what's the point of organizing cables if nothing is actually hooked up? So we got to take a detour from this and actually figure out where everything is going on the desk. By the way, this is what it looks like from the top, and as you can see, we do have plenty of clearance even with the drawer here. The wall adapter makes it a bit difficult to actually install here, but everything else will work just fine. Here is our cinema display, which I have cleaned off camera, so it is dust-free once again. And we are going to have to figure out how to deal with that cable mess, but it is looking fantastic. The cinema display will stay where it used to be because this is the best spot for it. It really doesn't make that much sense to be off to the side because this is where I'm sitting, and it's not like I can move off to the side because we obviously have the shelving here. So this is going to stay here, and we have to figure this out first because it of course has the special cable mess on the back. We will talk more about the airport later on, but as of right now we have to actually figure out where to put the Mac on the desk. The entire time I've had this Mac, it's always been on that PC tower. Yeah, it's been a long time. Such a crazy concept to have the computer on the desk. Now, I think it makes the most amount of sense to have the Mac over here because it fits, it looks nice with the cinema display, it'll work well with the cinema display in terms of cable management, it'll work well with the desk for that cable management. Don't forget we will have a second monitor and we do still have the airport to deal with. And I don't want to stack them because the airport will generate heat, the Mac Mini will generate heat, and I just don't want them to overheat at all, so it's better to keep them separate like this. Now, if I really wanted to save space, I could have the Mac in a vertical orientation, but that's just not something I want to deal with right now, and at the same time, there is also a chance that it could fall over. Now, granted, this is up against a corner, so the chances of that happening are relatively slim, but I don't want to take that chance at all unless I actually have a proper Mac, vertical stand, or if I actually make one out of something like Lego. Yeah, it's just not something I want to deal with right now. I just want a usable setup. I want it to look nice, and I want the cable organization to be actually reasonable. With the display and the Mac in their new spots for now, I will do some cable management off camera and start with the essentials here because if we install everything and do cable management at the same time, it's going to get real messy real quick. So I'm going to try and see what I can come up with the display and the Mac, and then later on we will start by adding things in one by one. Initial cable organization is looking fantastic. The cable organizer shelf is also doing its job with the brand new power strip and the power supply for the cinema display. And while I was actually organizing this cable up, I realized that this is the same type of cable that I can actually use on my Power Mac G5 in order to give it that factory finish, But I'm going to leave it with this because it is original to the cinema display as a whole, and it actually does have a date code of 2004. So that cable is going to stay here, but as you can see, it is looking fantastic in the setup, and honestly, I'm really happy with how it's starting to turn out. Now, as for the cable ties, I know that these are not exactly the best option available, but they are doing their job, and it's what I have on hand. Now, in the future, ideally, I would like to upgrade to Velcro cable ties, which are also reusable, but like I said, for now, these will do the job, and you saw how the setup was before. This is a significant improvement regardless. Besides, when you actually have the drawer here and you actually have the desk in the proper place, it's not like these are going to be super visible anyways. And yes, I do know that I can use zip ties here, but I would much rather use these for the time being. And this is what it looks like from the back side. Now, as we reinstall more cables, cable mess is inevitable, but as you can see, it is actually going really well, and the cinema display is also helping out because the stand is hiding the power cable for the Mac. So with the cinema display and the Mac Mini established in the setup, what about the secondary display? Believe it or not, I'm actually not going to be reinstalling this display in the setup because we have this one. Wow, we're going from 4x3 to 4x3. This specific Dell monitor has been part of my main setup for as long as I can remember. It's been used with a variety of different systems, laptops, desktops, and obviously for the past couple of years it's primarily been used with the Mac Mini, but I have used it with some Windows systems in the past. And up until I got the cinema display, this was actually my main display. But when I got the cinema display, this obviously turned into the secondary monitor. But even as a secondary monitor, it is still fantastic to use. Now, honestly, if I did not have this display, I would be reinstalling this one into the setup right now. But because of the way I actually use the setup, I haven't been taking advantage of all of the features that this display has to offer. For example, the soundbar here. I've had this installed for the past couple of years now at the very least, and even though I have used it briefly with some Windows machines, I have not used this with the Mac Mini once. Yes, it's been on this display for a very long time now, and I haven't used it at all. Secondly, this has a CFL backlight, and this one has an LED backlight. Now, considering I'm using a cinema display from 2004, the power consumption isn't that big of a concern to me, but I guess this will help offset the energy usage from the cinema display because we're going to LED. Wow, very exciting. But yeah, this is a display from 2015, and this one I believe is from 2009. Even though it is a CFL backlight though, it still provides a very nice bright image. Apart from that though, this is basically just a 2015 refresh of this monitor. It still has 4 USB ports, it still has VGA, DVI, but it also has display ports. Now, I don't have anything to take advantage of DisplayPort. I'm still going to have to use the VGA adapter on this display, but in the future, there is that upgrade path in case I do get a cable that supports this and the Mac Mini. But yeah, apart from the cosmetics and the LED backlight, this display is essentially a direct upgrade from this one. And in a way, the spirit of this monitor lives on with this one because the panel is actually the exact same resolution as the old one. I will also say that I think that the new stand on the new monitor will actually work better considering the space limitations of the desk. Not to say that this one is bad, I just think that this one will actually make use of the space more efficiently. Whenever I reuse the monitor elsewhere, all of this cable mess will definitely change because as you can see, yeah, it's a big mess. For example, the USB cable here, why is it this long? I don't remember why I chose this long of a cable. I found a shorter USB cable that I'll be using with the new display, so this makes absolutely no sense. So it'll be nice to actually have something that isn't as messy as this, and not to mention, the speaker itself will actually be repurposed elsewhere, so we're also taking away an extra cable from the setup. Now, honestly, I can probably talk about these Dell monitors all day, but I just wanted to show you guys that this, of course, has the 4-port USB hub with 2 USB ports at the side and 2 at the back here with the rest of the I/O. The new monitor, however, only has one visible USB port at the back, and the other three are actually hidden away with the rest of the I/O. There is, of course, the display port itself, but like I said, I don't have anything to take advantage of that at the moment. And normally there would be a door covering all of the cable mess here, but I don't have it, and I really don't care. The older Dell display, of course, also has the speaker provisions, but this one doesn't have anything for that. I know we talked a lot about this Dell monitor, but it has a lot of history, and honestly, I can't wait to repurpose it once again. All we need for this monitor is power, VGA for video, a USB Type-B cable for the USB hub, and of course a Thunderbolt to VGA adapter. I know it seems like a big waste to use Thunderbolt for VGA, but this is the only real Thunderbolt adapter that I have. I do actually have a Thunderbolt to HDMI cable, but it's not useful in this instance because this doesn't have HDMI. So in the future, if I do get other Thunderbolt accessories, I would like to actually make use of them and probably get some kind of dock to actually hook everything up. Let's fast forward to more organized cable madness. Now this is looking fantastic. The silver elements on the Dell display also matches the aluminum theme. We now have power, VGA, and USB hooked up to the rest of the setup, and even with the additional cables added, it is still holding up really well. As I continue to manage all of this cable mess here, I see that there are different and better ways of actually dealing with this, but I think for the time being, these cable ties are doing their job very well, and until we actually make some additional upgrades or improvements to the setup, this is good enough for now, and it's already a big improvement compared to what it used to be. If I really wanted to, I could also remove these two power cables so they go underneath the desk like the cinema display power supply, but again, I think that this is fantastic for now, and I really don't see any further signs of improvement until we actually get some professional cable management equipment. The airport is now hooked up to the setup as well with power and Ethernet for the Mac Mini. Now, I don't necessarily need Ethernet because the Mac Mini, of course, has Wi-Fi, but it is nice to have an extra cable. And this is one of the three cables from the previous Ethernet cables that were here. This is just the thinnest one out of the three, and it's a Cat5e cable, so it should be good enough for at least a backup alternative. I have also made a small cosmetic change to the cables. As you can see, we actually have white cable ties now because I found out that I actually had some extras that I completely forgot about. So I have removed the old ones, and at the very least, it looks a little bit nicer now. The airport is hanging off the side of the desk a bit, but it honestly isn't that big of a deal. For the first time in probably ever, all of the shelves here are empty, yet everything is good to go. It's all connected up to power, everything is hooked up at the back, and the only thing we have left is the external Seagate hard drive alongside this additional power strip. Typically, the external drive here is perfectly fine to use in the vertical orientation in the bottom shelf and the middle shelf. However, because of the top shelf having the drawer here, I can't leave it as it is. So the plan is to actually reuse these cork pieces from earlier because this will provide a great buffer between the hard drive and the shelf itself. Now I'm only doing this because the hard drive doesn't have any rubber feet on the side, only on the bottom. And here it is. The hard drive is now in its new home, and I'm really happy with how everything turned out. The power supply cable is as perfect as it could be. The USB cable could be a bit longer, but in this case, it does make it to the Mac Mini, and that's the most important thing because this is actually a USB 3 drive. The cork pieces are working really well at elevating the hard drive and also providing it with enough airflow underneath it. Way better than actually setting it down directly on the shelf. And I also set it up so that the rubber feet of the hard drive are pushed up against the side of the desk, so the hard drive itself is not going anywhere. Now, as for the rest of the cable mess here, it's going to stay like this for the time being because I really don't have a good solution for all of this. Now, those cables are of course for the 30-pin and lightning cable organizer. Now, I don't have anything else to install in the top shelf here for now, but we do still have all of those USB ports alongside an iPad charger available to us. So I guess we might as well keep it and see if it is actually useful. And the reason I say that is because even though I've had this installed for quite a while, I've used it probably only a handful of times. Now, it is nice to have, but then again, you saw how messy the old setup was, so maybe with this new redesign, I might actually use this more. For now, though, I have actually removed one of the 30-pin cables, and I also swapped out another for an older style one. This is to differentiate that this one is connected directly to the iPad charger, while the other two, including the lightning connector, is powered up directly from the power strip itself. And after all our hard work, here is the final result. The setup is looking great. I'm really happy with how everything turned out. And obviously this is not like the final revision. This setup is never complete in the sense that we can always add further upgrades to it. So obviously we can add further accessories, further external hard drives, improve the monitor situation. There's a lot of potential here, but as it is right now, I think that it is looking really good, and I'm really happy because, well, I don't have to keep saying how bad the old setup was. This is a million times better. Hiding behind the cinema display is the Anker Power Cube. Now this has always been convenient because it gives me 3 additional outlets alongside 3 USB ports directly on the desk itself. Previously, it was always on the desk in the same spot, and even though it is useful, it could get in the way sometimes. Now though, I can actually take it out when I need to use it and put it away when I don't. But I can still use it even as it is because it's obviously not being obstructed by anything. It's just in a more convenient position. So I'm really happy with how everything turned out with this in terms of cable management. And you may have noticed I also have a lightning dock here. So this is permanently connected up to the Dell display. And the idea behind this is whenever I'm done recording a video, I can just plug in the iPhone X here and I can transfer everything to the Mac Mini without having to do any extra cable nonsense. And when I'm done, I can take the iPhone out of the dock, put the dock away, and it'll be ready for next time. The position of the Dell monitor is not yet permanent. I will just have to figure out what actually works best. With the YetiCaster back in the setup, it's pretty much all good to go. This is the final result for the cable management. And everything here, once it's actually pushed up against the wall, really doesn't take that much space to begin with. So these actually serve a purpose, and we pretty much don't have anything that is extra. The only exception here is the YetiCaster. A while back, I actually added an extra USB cable here, and this is mainly just for convenience. It means that I can always keep one of the cables plugged into the Mac setup, and then I can use another one of the cables for the iPhone itself if I want to record audio directly from the YetiCaster instead of the internal microphone on the iPhone. The power strips are one of the cleanest parts of the setup here. I'm really happy with how the cabling turned out, and I do actually have a reusable cable tie here, which I was previously using just for this one. And as you can see, it is very clean, and we have just enough cable length to actually plug it into the wall, and I can still take out the desk if I need to without unplugging everything. So it's very nice, very convenient. So let's finally wrap up this project by actually plugging in the desk. So this is, of course, the main power strip, and I will be installing it in the bottom outlet. Well, look at that. We already have networking. With the desk back where it's supposed to be, my initial impressions are that it feels bigger than before, but also more spacious in general. Now, it's most likely due to the fact that we got rid of the desktop that used to be here, and that opens up a lot of floor space because obviously the big desktop took up space on the floor, and at the same time, it created a barrier between the desk itself and the rest of the space here. So I'm really happy with how everything turned out here, and honestly, it feels like a whole new room and setup in general because I honestly can't remember the last time it was like this. It's clean, it's functional, we don't have any extra cables that need to be removed. Overall, I'm really happy with how everything turned out. It's done. It's finally done. The setup is complete with the chair, the keyboard, the trackpad, and of course the headphones. There are so many awesome minor improvements with this setup that it's just going to make everything a whole lot easier. For starters, the headphones, when they were plugged into the Mac, which was over here, well, as you can imagine, there was always a cable mess on the desk, on the floor, all over the place. But with the Mac being over there now, I can actually just use the headphones and not worry about the cable because it's always going to be over there. It's not going to be on the desk. It's not going to be going all over the place. It's actually usable. And another nice bonus is the built-in lightning cable. So overall, it's just a huge improvement in pretty much every way possible. And honestly, let's just look at these drawers one more time. That is fantastic. I can't remember the last time I actually even used these drawers properly. So this is such a huge step up from before, which was basically just nonsense. This is honestly unbelievable. It's clean. I can actually use it for something that is related to the setup here. In fact, I could actually use this to store the keyboard and the trackpad whenever I need to clear off the desk. This is amazing! Well, what do you know? The Dell monitor actually fits the Mac setup really well because it actually has the same sleep animation just like the Mac. Nice! This is so cool. So far, so good. This is hilarious. After all this hard work, I completely forgot about the USB receiver. It's plugged into the Dell monitor and it's actually working. The Dell monitor looks fantastic. And what's cool about it is that instead of having a row of pre-selected options here, the buttons are vertical and they blend into the bezel. Even more interesting, the on-screen menu itself is physically larger in comparison to the old one, and we have a very cool selection of options alongside this energy usage bar, which I have never seen on a monitor before. But then again, a lot of my displays are way older than this, and even though this one is newer, it is still from 2015. I have actually taken a look at the options, and something that I did immediately is I reset the display settings, so everything is factory reset, and I will adjust them if I need to, but so far it is looking great. And I've also changed the first shortcut for input source. Previously it was at preset modes. Now I don't necessarily use presets all that often, so I figured I might as well just keep it at this because all the Dell monitors always have an input selection at the front here anyways, so I figured I might as well keep that trend and just keep it as is. In system preferences, we obviously have the wonderful cinema display, which we will take a look at in a second, but we also have our Dell monitor. The resolution is the default at 1280 by 1024 at 60 Hz, and that matches up with everything inside system preferences. The color profile is also for the Dell monitor itself, which is really cool to see. And I'm wondering if we can actually change the refresh rate. We do actually have an option for 75 Hz. macOS says that it is actually running at that, but let's see the display settings. And what do you know, we actually have a free improvement in performance here with an extra increase in the refresh rate. Not sure what this is all about, but it does say 75 Hz here and in macOS itself, so I guess I'll just keep it as is unless I have some kind of problem, which then I will switch back to 60 Hz. The cinema display is doing its job at being awesome. Obviously everything is default for the display. And there is the Mac Mini itself running macOS Big Sur. Now, I really don't care that I'm not on the latest and greatest. This, of course, is a 2012 Mini, which officially only supported up to Catalina, but as you can see, we're running Big Sur without a problem. Through the magic of OpenCore Legacy Patcher, it runs just fine, and I really only do one thing on the Mini itself. Run Final Cut and edit videos for you guys, such as the one you're watching right now. I will also say that I'm actively looking to downgrade to older versions of macOS as well, such as the Power Mac itself for general fun and messing around with old macOS, and macOS Lion on the 2008 MacBook for iTunes. As of right now, I really don't have any plans on updating this beyond Big Sur because it runs just fine. I really don't need it to run a newer version because, like I said, this is primarily focused on Final Cut itself. To end off today's video though, we could actually update OpenCore itself because as you can see, Yeah, I'm kind of out of date with this. Now, generally, I'm not a big fan of constant updates and always having to update everything, but for some things, I will update them, such as OpenCore here. And the Mac Mini itself will be essentially as up to date as possible, at least with Big Sur. So yeah, typically I do not use one single machine for absolutely everything. I mean, if I wanted to or if I needed to, I could, but I prefer having the Mac Mini here as the dedicated YouTube machine for Final Cut. I have a small update about the refresh rate here. Even though we set it to 75 Hz, it started causing some issues and some weird artifacting problems. Fortunately, the display itself is just fine, but clearly it did not like it at all. So I set it back to 60 Hz, and initially it did not fix it, so I swapped out the cable just to test it out, and it was working just fine. So I reinstalled the initial cable that's actually in the setup itself, and now fortunately everything is looking fantastic. I'm sure this isn't a problem on DVI or DisplayPort, but I don't really care because I don't really need a high refresh rate here. This is of course just a secondary monitor, and even at 60 Hz with a VGA signal, it's working just fine. Well, what do you know? A new version is available, newer than what we were just looking at. 2.0.2 is released and I'm still on 1.2.1. Yes, I have not updated this because unfortunately I just haven't had much time to actually work at the setup here, and it's great timing. Anyways, before that happened, we were talking about how I didn't have enough time to actually deal with the macOS side of things here. Nice. All of the extra patches here are completely done, fully installed, and we now have a fully up-to-date version of OpenCore, at least as of the time I'm recording this. For the most part, everything here is now complete. The setup itself, the Mac Mini with macOS, and as you can see, I have been using the setup here. I have also moved the cable for the headphones into the drawer, which works really well. It keeps the cable nice and tidy, and overall I'm just really happy with how everything has turned out. I know that it kind of got messy around the end, but things kept showing up one after the other, such as the Dell display and the new update to OpenCore. Obviously, if you're watching this in the future, this will be, well, an old version, but like I said, it's the current release as I'm recording this, and even though it has taken me quite a while to finally finish off this video, I will say that I have been using the setup for a while now. I actually like the placement of the Dell monitor because from the way I actually look at it when I'm sitting down, that is a perfect view, and even though it looks like a little bit is cut off, it really doesn't affect anything at all, especially for a secondary display. Another interesting thing is that I found myself actually using this pretty regularly. So I use it to charge up the iPhone 6, the iPhone 10 here, any other iPhones that I have in the area, alongside 30-pin, but this actually has been pretty handy to have. If you made it to the end of the video, then consider leaving a thumbs up. I know it was a long video, but again, I'm just really happy to actually have this done, and hopefully this will help me make more videos in the future. If you want to see more awesome stuff just like this, then consider checking out the iTunes library. It's my ultimate retro Mac experience with classic macOS, PowerPC Macs, and not to mention just retro everything. But that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.